The buried anger and the rage was driving my addiction. It was driving depression. I mean, it was driving a lot of stuff. The way for me to really get to a place of peace or safety is to go into the anger, to dig up what's buried that's driving the dysregulation in the nervous system. I mean, that's why our nervous systems are dysregulated in the first place, because there's buried repressed emotions from childhood down there. The more skillful you get at it, the more you can catch what's the thing that my system's landed on that I'm believing, challenge it, tie it to the buried stuff. That's the one tool.
Alrighty, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Enheartened. And as you already know, I am really passionate about everything that brings us back to the body, everything that brings us back to the heart. And that sometimes requires, seeing the unseen within ourselves, the things that we usually don't want to see, feeling the unfelt, meaning the unseen includes our emotions, and also finding a new way of relating to these emotions, to the things that we didn't know how to feel to resolution to completion before. And I really wanted to dive into that so much more in the episode of today. And this is basically the work that our guest today does. Dan McLintock is here with us, and he is a co-founder of a specific methodology to help resolve emotional repression called Kiloby inquiries. And I just want to have a heartfelt conversation about what I consider to be global epidemic at the moment, which is emotional repression. And sometimes even people who are very emotionally expressive don't really necessarily express what is really in there. So I think it's going to be a beautiful conversation. I am excited to have you here today, Dan. Thank you for agreeing to having this conversation, and welcome to Enheartened.
Yeah, thanks, Xavier. Yeah, I'm excited too, very much so. I was just saying before we signed on that it's like, I followed you for a while, and you're a voice that cuts through. You're a voice that I really, every time I see something that you post, it's like, woof, yeah, that just kind of cuts through the white noise. So yeah, I'm very grateful and excited to be here. Yeah.
I appreciate that reflection. Thank you very much. And what you're naming, it's actually coming from a lot of personal confusion. It might not seem like it, but I consider myself to be a very slow learner, and I get confused a lot. So usually I only share things that have finally made sense to me. And I think many people are dealing with a great deal of confusion when it comes to navigating their inner world. And I wonder if that has also been your experience in this line of work.
That's been my experience in this line of work, and it's been my experience in life. I think for me, it was like most of my young life in my 20s and 30s, I spent in the state of confusion and self-doubt, confusion, disorientation. It felt like that was sort of like my MO. That's like where I lived, And so I'm the same as you. It's like when I started to do the deeper work, which for me, I came into this work that we developed, the emotional repression work, through like Ken Wilber's shadow work and like Byron Katie's inquiry work. And it was sort of a bunch of things where it was like I had to start questioning what I call my programming or my beliefs. I started with the belief questioning, and then I realized we had to take it further. When I say we, Scott Kiloby is my co-developer in the Kiloby inquiries. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think what I didn't recognize and what people don't recognize is that the confusion is because we're locked into these belief systems or thought systems or identities, right? And that's where the confusion comes from, because I'm living in that sort of conceptual world of the belief and concepts,
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that keeps that feeling true, in my experience, has been the buried, repressed emotions in the body, which, in your work, I'm sure you'd say it's like the shadow keeps that feeling true, and it drives the confusion.
Yeah. And I wonder what were some of these beliefs for you that kept the programming alive and that hindered your capacity to get in deeper touch, getting more in touch with yourself, what are some beliefs that you've had to maybe dissolve or move beyond?
Well, the first couple that identified and that felt really true for me, because that's part of our work, is it's like identifying what am I, if I'm in confusion or if I'm in suffering, what am I even believing? Like what's happening here, right? And the first couple for me were what we call deficiency stories, which are just like stories of self, right? So it would be like I'm not good enough, or I'm unwanted, or I'm unsafe, right? Any kind of like really deep belief, core belief about the self.
Mm,
Those were the first that I started to look at, and then it sort of opened into, as I started to work with those and dissolve those, then I noticed, oh my gosh, there's a lot of other beliefs about about other people, about the world, whatever it is, whether it's, the world is dangerous, or whether it's I have to take care of people, or one of my, I call my greatest hits, because I'll talk about this in a second. I'm an anger repressor primarily, is
hmm
I have to be good.
Yeah,
That was like a huge one for me. And that was what fit like hand in glove when I came into spirituality, was like, I have to be good. I
yeah,
have to be peaceful. I have to be a good boy,
yeah. And what would you say really strengthened? I assume there are some adverse childhood experiences that caused you to lean in the direction of like, hey, I have to be good or else, or something might unfold. I wonder what was your experience? What caused you to really anchor that belief within yourself?
Yep. Yep. Well, it was a number of different things, but in my family of origin, it was primarily, it was having a dad. And there was he who had a lot of trauma himself. I mean, he grew up and he went to the Navy. So he was very militaristic and just had a lot of really difficult things in his childhood. But he would periodically sort of burst into rages, when I was a kid, right? So I was always kind of anticipating that as a kid. And then, so I've got a dad that's sort of like, I don't know when the bomb's going to go off, right? And then I've got a mom over here who is going, don't be like your father, right? Don't be like him. Don't be angry. Don't be dominant. She was sort of like saying, you're a sensitive kid. You're a good kid. So just be like that, so I've got it reinforced from both sides. I can't get angry with the bomb that's about to explode with dad, because I'll get crushed. And I can't be angry um, with mom, because she needs me to not be like dad, So
Yeah. So you were stuck almost between a rock and a hard place. And the only option was to learn how to be the nice guy, the nice boy. Yeah. So what did it look like for you? So when I look at this situation, what it tells me is probably any hint of aggression, you took it and put it in the shadow. Like any anger, you took and put in the shadow, and really wanting to embrace this persona that would be seen as likable, especially to your mom, and also as, not irritating to your dad. And I wonder, what did it look like for you to reclaim a relationship with anger or aggression?
Yep. Yeah, great question. Yeah, so it was for me, it was anger. And along with the anger, it was any big emotions or energies. So anger, sexuality,
hmm
masculinity, power, like anything. In KI, we say you're either repressing the big stuff or you're repressing the vulnerable stuff
Yes.
primarily, right? So for me, it was all of that stuff. And I had to push that down. At the time, I didn't know that I was pushing that down as a kid. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it was sort of just happening so I could survive. But that got jammed down into the body. And then, like you said, I became the nice guy. I became the people pleaser. I needed people to like me, and I needed to have that like friendly,
Yeah.
pleasing front. So, so the thing that I started to realize when we were developing the Kiloby inquiries was that as a result of pushing that stuff down, we have an axiom that says, when I bury what's true, I'm forced to identify with what's false in the work. So it was like I had to bury the anger and put it in the shadow and then show up as the pleaser or the nice guy, whatever it was. And then what was false was the identities of I'm not good enough or I'm unsafe. It's like that's the fault. The false self was the deficiency stories that arose out of the buried, repressed emotions in the body.
Yeah.
So to answer your question about how did I start to reintegrate it, I think what I did first was I had to process, because there was a lot of hurt and grief for me too that was happening. So I went through about 5 years of just processing that stuff, which I thought was the core of everything, because in spirituality or in some 12-step programs that I went to, which was like adult children of alcoholics and Al-Anon were two that I did. They talked about the abandonment wound. And I assumed that the core of everything for me was going to be this deep grief and this deep sadness, So I went through about 5 years of that work. And then when I was working with Scott one day, because we developed this work, by the way, I can talk to you about this later, but we developed the work in a hot tub for like 2 years. So we just went out every night into a hot tub as friends and just hung out. But what I said to him was, I'm starting to feel like I might be angry.
Yeah.
Which if you had asked me that when I was in the repression, are you angry? I would say, what do you mean? Like, what's anger? What are you talking about? That's how deeply it was repressed. So anyways, so we started to develop the repression work out of that, because he found in his experience at about the same time as I did that his spine pain was connected to his buried anger from childhood. And I started to realize that my stomach contraction and my addictive behaviors were driven by that buried anger. So we just started to open that box, and that's how the repression work started. And as I've integrated it, there's this fear, of course, in my body, because I've been so terrified of buried anger and rage for my entire life. There's this fear that it's like, when I do that, I'm just going to go off on people. Like I'm just going to become my dad,
Yes. Yeah. That's very interesting, and there's a lot of like fine print in everything that you're saying, and I really want to get into the fine print. And the first thing is, and I assume as a younger, as a child, probably the awareness of your repression wasn't even a thing. But there's this, are you aware of the ways you started compensating for not being able to express frustration and anger? And what did that look like? What are the ways you started coping for not being able to express anger, frustration, maybe even disappointment on it? Because in my opinion, and also in my experience, what we don't express directly will find distorted ways to be expressed. So I've often seen people who are not able to express anger directly. They are really good at sarcasm. And that's or passive aggression, or, silently snarky comments here and there, or, they might also be terribly good at shutting down. But I just wonder, what did it look like for you? And let's say somebody right now is listening to this and the person knows that they have a really complicated relationship with anger, they are in repression, just so that they can build awareness of what is actually going on within them.
Yeah, beautiful. So there's a number of different manifestations of the anger repression that showed up for me. One was definitely what you said, which was passive aggression, or, I would poke people sometimes, or be sarcastic like that. That was for sure one. Another was the disconnecting from people. That was a big one. It would be like, there's a couple relationships that I had where I started to realize in hindsight that I had gotten angry with the person. And instead of discussing it with them and going to them and saying I'm angry or I'm hurt or whatever it was, I would just, it's like ghosting, right? I would just like disconnect from the relationship and say, I don't want to be, in this connection anymore. So, disconnecting is big. People pleasing, like we've said, And the anger repressors, it's interesting. I want to talk about more about like the anger repressor side versus the hurt and vulnerability repression side, because there's a lot of dynamics
Yeah.
in both sides that like, sort of complement each other. But
Yeah. Can you clarify both the two sides for somebody just tuning in into the conversation so that they know, okay, vulnerability and hurt repression, is this, and anger repression is this?
yes. Okay. So anger repression, which is what I primarily repressed as a kid. Anger repression is anything that anger, rage, power, like I said earlier, masculinity, sexuality, big feelings, big emotions, big energies, right? So what happens is when I say that's what I primarily repress, that means that's what my nervous system is the most afraid to acknowledge, access, feel, or express.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the anger repression side is, and anger repressors tend to, when they get triggered, because when they get triggered, what happens is that anger starts to try to rise up and we get scared of it. So anger repressors will get small, right? They'll shrink, or they'll go into sort of like the victim stance, right? Because they're so terrified of the anger.
Mm-hmm.
The hurt repression side is the opposite, right? So like my wife is a hurt and vulnerability repressor. When she gets triggered, she goes up, she gets big, and she gets dominant, right? Because there's so much fear in her nervous system around her buried grief or her sadness or her hurt that she can't let that be acknowledged or expressed or seen by other people, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what we're dealing with. And it's funny because I think a lot of times people will think, well, that sounds like the male or the masculine kind of archetype is more of the hurt repressor and the feminine is the anger repressor. But it's actually about 50-50, honestly, because I work with a lot of people and there's a lot of men anger repressors and there's a lot of women hurt repressors, right?
Would you say if we were going into some sort of like, and I acknowledge that it's an overly generalized characterization that I want to make right now. Would you say that anger repressors are usually showing up as the appeasers, the pleasers, and vulnerability repressors are often the ones that would express more on the top, more aggression, more hostility at times, like a feral animal that has been wounded and doesn't want anybody to touch the wound? Would you say it's an accurate I know it's an overgeneralization, but would you say it's somewhat accurate?
It's perfect. Yeah, I think it's totally accurate. I mean, because I work with both types a lot, and that's what is reported by by them, is like the hurt pressure will say, it's safer for me to get aggressive and to get angry. It's safer for my system to default to that than it is to realize that I'm actually hurt and I'm sad in that moment, and the flip for the anger repressor. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And how can somebody begin to crack the shell? It's like I become aware of maybe I fit into this category or fit into that category. How can somebody begin to crack the shell and dive beneath?
I think what you can look for is what's the missing experience, in your life. Like, what is the thing that's missing in your relationships? Are you able to cry in front of your partner? Are you able to, express your needs? Are you able to show that vulnerability to your partner or to people that you're close to, Or frankly, I mean, when we're doing the work, we'll say to anyone, can you do that to anybody? Could you go to the person at Publix and cry in front of them? Publix is a grocery store in the States. So, and then with an anger repressor, it's like, yeah, can you stand up for yourself? Can you set boundaries? Can you express the anger? Can you be firm or direct with people, And so that's kind of some of the questions that can start to crack the shell. And then we've got some tools, which I can show you some of them if you want to.
Yeah.
Talk about it today, as far as like what questions to ask to see what the repression in the body will say.
Yeah. So I want to get into the tools, and I also want to dive into something that you started talking about before as you were developing the Kiloby inquiries. Yeah, you started talking about first you had to go through the hurt that was in there, and you went through you mentioned 12 steps program for children of alcoholic parents, and it feels like leaning into the hurt was the first step for you to even acknowledge that anger is here in my body. So, my question is, when you started acknowledging that, oh, I think I might be angry, what did it look like for you to actually lean in there and even begin to express the anger? How did that shift you or your relationship with anger?
I mean, first of all, it was terrifying to start to tap into it. It really was, because there was a lot of stuff buried. I mean, the buried anger and the rage was driving my addiction. It was driving depression. I mean, it was driving a lot of stuff, right? Even
Hmm.
in spirituality, and I'd been in it for, like I said, 5 to 10 years or whatever, working with the grief and the sadness. It would be like I would process some of that stuff with my therapist or with Scott Kiloby, my friend and co-developer, and there would be kind of a release, and it would feel good to cry and to get to that stuff. But then I always noticed, and I said this to Scott, I always noticed that my suffering would start to come back a day or two later. It would start to return. And I'm like, this has been happening for like 5 years. Like, what is going on? Like
Hmm.
it's like I have a compulsion to suffer, even though I'm doing the work. Like, what's happening with this? And so that's when we started to realize the difference between emotions and buried emotions.
Hmm.
Like safer emotions or more surface level emotions, which for some people are even hard to tap in. That's even hard to tap into, is
Yeah.
the more surface level stuff. And so when I started to tap into the anger, it was scary, but it was also huge relief. You know what I mean? Because it was like puncturing a balloon that had been just like expanding in my system, for
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
would you say that um, I am curious, the time when you start working with the anger and leaning in there, are your parents still in the picture? Are they still around? What is your relationship with them, or how has your relationship with your parents evolved as you've learned to get closer to your anger and without repressing it?
Yeah. Yeah. They are still around, and what's funny is they actually followed me into the work. So
Hmm.
I started doing the work with Scott Kiloby. Like, I went to his treatment center in 2014. And so that's how I met him and started to, you know, uh, develop the Kiloby inquiries. But they followed me out to the treatment center. After I went, they saw some of the shifting that happened in me. So both of them just went, "We want to do what you're doing."
Yeah. What were can you say more about the shifts? How did it what are the shifts that were practical in your relationship with them? Because I would assume at some point there was a lot of shutting down, not expressing the things that you're not really happy about, the anger, not expressing needs to a certain degree. So what were the tangible shifts that started happening at the beginning?
They were, yeah, it was more expression. Like, I was showing up
Yes.
more and expressing more, whether it was needs or emotions. And I started, because there was like, I was not even able to show them my grief or my sadness or anything for a while. It was like everything was held back. And so I
Yeah.
started being able to say I was sad about this or this hurt. And so that came first because like I said earlier, it was safer to express that stuff to them. And they're boomers. And so they were raised that don't, you know, children are to be seen and not heard, don't talk,
Yeah.
don't trust, don't feel, you know what I mean? So they're like kind of going like, what is this? Like,
Yeah.
what is this new language that we're speaking here? So, and I got to give them the benefit of the doubt too. My mom got into Al-Anon when I was like in my teenage years. So she had been doing that too. She had been sort of
Yeah.
like working with
Was
her stuff. But yeah,
was she or was your dad were they both alcoholics, or was she the alcoholic?
she was both of her parents, my mom's parents, were alcoholic and they died drunk actually.
Wow.
And so the alcoholism, the family disease of alcoholism is what they call it, which to me, I just redefine that as emotional repression,
Yeah.
basically. The
Yeah.
family disease comes down the line. So I got that from her. And then um, his dad was a rageaholic and he was like in the military. So he just shut down everything, you know?
Yeah.
And he went through some abuse too when he was a kid. So, anyways, I inherited all of that from both sides,
Yeah. I see
you
that.
know?
Yeah.
So,
So what was their experience of following you into this work, and also how has the relationship continued to shift when you embrace more of this work yourself?
well, in the last 5 years or so since we really developed and started to uh, do the emotional repression work with people, and I've done it more and more, and they've started to do it. I mean, I've said to both of them, I was furious at the way I was raised. I was so angry the way that you handled this or handled that or whatever. And that was just something that when I started to even consider it, my body put up such a fight. My repression mechanism was like, there's no way that you're going to be able to say this to them, you know? Um, but I did. And I think that's why in our work, we say that the expression, getting to the point where you've made enough of the repression and enough of the frozen fear around your buried dominance, like around, for me, around my anger, um, getting to the point where you can start to express that is game over. Because if you can start to fully express the full range of human emotions to whomever it is, that your body will start to let you do that. Because it's not like, sometimes it's just not even a matter of will. I can't will myself to do that because the repression's so strong. Then, you know, you're good to go. So,
Did you have any baby steps? Because in my perception of working around a core wounding, our caregivers at some point in time, they represented people who had very close to ultimate power over us. Meaning, and I'm not saying that in a bad way or negative way, because it's just how life works. As a child, your caregiver decides if you eat today or if you don't. Your caregiver decides what you have permission to do, what you don't have permission to do. And again, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. It's just how human society is and how we've evolved. So what I mean by that is these people who at some point in time had ultimate power over you power over, if I'm going to use that terminology,
yeah.
sometimes intrinsically can be a lot harder to challenge them, to express frustration and anger to them, especially if it was not allowed growing up. So I wonder if you had some baby steps in some other relationships, in some other aspects of your life where you were practicing expressing, hey, this is not working, or I'm not happy with this. I'm not, did you,
Yeah.
I wonder if the question is clear.
It's totally clear. And yes, definitely. I mean, I think the first place was in the container of inquiry, basically,
Yeah.
where it's like, if I'm working with a mentor or I'm doing the work on my own, it's like, and I could crack into the anger and start to express it. I mean, I'll go, I'm not angry with whoever it is. And the body will go, yes, I am.
Yeah.
And then I'm just sitting here, whether it's in front of my mentor or on my own, going, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. And just really, so there's that first. And then for me, it was with a couple friends and my wife where I'd be able to, and it didn't even show up as like, sometimes as me saying, I'm angry, but it would be like, no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I would just, and I'm sort of surprised myself with my
Yeah.
life and be like, no, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to, or whatever it was, which was like different for me, the people
Yeah.
pleaser.
W-
Um,
would would you say you
yeah.
had a surge? My experience with expressing anger or even asserting a no, there's like a jolt of power that for some people who have been repressing their anger for a long time, it feels almost like surprising. It's like, where is this coming from? When you say that no for the first time and it's really an embodied no. I wonder why, how that was like for you.
Yeah, it was a surprise. And it was, I remember feeling like it was, oh, wow, like it was a relief and it was refreshing
Yeah.
because I was like, oh my gosh, like it feels like now I'm in my power, I'm back
Yeah.
in my power. So yeah. And you know what's funny is for the people listening to this who are hurt and vulnerability repressors, they're probably going, what? Like I'm anger, like you feel that when you express anger,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's this, but it's the same. I would say to those listening who are thinking that, my wife would say the same thing about when she finally was able to express the vulnerability or the grief or whatever it was. It's the same thing where it's like, oh, like that feels truer to her because it's buried deeper. Whereas
Yeah.
for us as anger repressors, that's truer for us, because it's
Yeah.
what's running the show. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I also wonder what did it look like for you to clean your relationship with anger? Because from your personal story you shared, first I'll start with um, one of the ways I relate to anger. I like to differentiate between hostility and anger, aggression and anger, violence and anger, because I consider them to be things we do with anger rather than the purest essence of anger itself. I consider anger this sacred fire. At the very least, let's call it a heart-centered anger or clean anger. It's that
Yeah.
sacred fire that is telling you, I am not okay with the way I am being treated in this moment. And you had this mirroring coming from your dad, which is just the expression, the outbursts of rage. And I assume we internalize that to a certain degree.
Yeah.
It's like I internalize, we have these mirror cells. Basically, we internalize, and then you might choose to repress because your mom said, no, don't be like that. So I internalize, and then I'm going to push it down. I don't want to be this way. So basically, the question is twofold. Have you had episodes of losing it like your dad would? And the second thing is, how did you learn to clean the anger from the rageful edge?
Yeah. Yeah. God, great two questions. The first thing is, yes, I have had those. That's happened. Not a lot, but there have been a couple times. And again, it's like we were talking about earlier, it's a surprise when it happens. Like one time,
Yes.
Dana, my wife, was sort of like talking about something, and she was like, she kept kind of what felt like needling me. And then all of a sudden, I just slammed the table with my fist, and I was like,
Mm,
wow, and then stop. And I got so angry. And I would just surprise me as much as it surprised her. And she got scared. She actually ran in her room and got scared and stuff. And I was like going, oh shit. But so I just repaired that. And I just went, hey, I'm
yeah.
sorry. I'm doing this work where I'm coming out of repression. Sometimes it's messy and it comes through, and that wasn't about you. And, forgive me, basically. And so we
Yeah.
repaired it and I cleaned it up. But I will say this too. For I to differentiate between clean anger and like violent anger or aggression or whatever, I I do that conceptually, but for my body, what I have to do when I'm doing the work is go, it sounds really weird, but when I'm trying to work with the repression, I'd say something like, it's okay to be violent. Do you know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
okay to be aggressive. It's okay to be, one of the biggest responses I've ever had in my body was, it's okay to be like dad. It's okay
Yes.
to express anger and rage like that. Huge no in my body. And right where that no happens, that's where the buried anger and the fear or the repression of the anger live, is in that spot. And so that's just, you know what I mean? So I'm testing it using stuff that sounds horrible, like it's okay to hurt people. And my body goes, no. And it's like, okay, I want to work with that, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and this isn't giving, obviously saying don't go hurt people if you're
Of course.
coming
Yeah.
out of repression, but it's like, will your body let you, you know what I mean? If you're in a situation where you had to do that, would your body
Yeah.
let you do that? And that's the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love what you're bringing up so much because it gets into, I mean, my brain is now bursting with a million questions, but it taps into the non-dual aspect of things. It's like, of course, the nice guy in you wants to be nice. And at the same time, not being able to express anger is not really being nice. in not being able to be violent because for some reason you've been sedated. It's not really being nice, but having the capacity for like, hey, I know I can hurt you if I really let myself, but I choose not to. And that is really the kindness in there. It's anyways,
Yeah.
that's what I just want to highlight from what you shared. So the counterintuitive statement or the counterintuitive permission, which is, you know, it's okay. It's okay to be violent, or it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be, aggressive type thing, which is not like permission slip to go ahead and hurt people, but it's just permission slip for you to get in touch with the part of you that was shut down inside, and permission to maybe even accept the part of you that has the capacity for that. Would you say
Yeah.
it is accurate in how your process has been?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's beautifully said. Totally. Cause it's like it's really ultimately giving yourself progressively permission to be you in all aspects. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
and it's a practical thing. You know what I mean? It's a really practical thing. Like I think sometimes people can use spirituality. This is a whole nother topic we could probably
Yeah.
unpack for a while. People use
Yeah.
spirituality to reinforce their repression. They don't even know they're doing it. You know what I mean? But it's
Yes.
like that's used. And so this is going, okay, put spirituality aside. Will the emotional repression in your body allow you to be you? Will it do that? Here's how to check. It's okay to be violent. Body goes, nope. It's like, okay, there's repression. So work with that, or here, it's
Yeah.
okay for hurt repressors. It's okay to express your needs. It's okay to be vulnerable. Nope. Okay, there's your repression. Work with that, So
Yeah.
we joke about sometimes, because part of the work, it almost feels like positive self-gaslighting, where I'm like
Yes.
challenging everything that I believe. Really, ultimately, it's like all of it gets put on the table. I'm challenging it in order to get to the buried stuff,
Yeah. I love that so much. And I want to get into you made a really beautiful distinction here, which is working with the repression instead of, working against. It's like the statement is almost like a scanner that you run through the body to see what where there's tension within, and wherever there's tension, that means, okay, this is where the work needs to go. But before we dive in there, you mentioned saying when you were repairing with your wife, you said, I'm going through this process of learning how to work with this anger, and it's a little messy, and I think it was important to even name that. I wonder how important it is for people listening to this conversation to expect stepping out of repression to be a little bit messy, maybe a whole lot more than they expect.
Yeah. I mean, what I tell people when they start the work usually is, uh, just expect to feel like you're going crazy for a little while. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
expect frankly, sometimes the things that you've been the most afraid of to start happening.
Yes.
Like you may lose relationships may change. You may freak out on people, or you may get hurt. If you're vulnerable, you may get hurt. I mean, it's part of the process, but, um, and it's also really fun and it's really liberating at the same
Yeah.
time, and I know, I can see that you know what I'm talking about. And I know
Yeah.
from what you talk about, and from your work, the shadow work, that it's similar process where it's like, oh man, this is really challenging, but man, is it like enlivening and fun,
That's the word. It's really enlivening. It's something that was frozen inside of your psyche, inside of your body. It's now coming alive, and it's still terrifying, maybe to the youngster inside of us that is like, okay, this was not allowed growing up. So how do there's that journey of reparenting, a part of you that was like, no, 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 this was not okay growing up. And now you're asking me to lean in there. So it's terrifying to a certain degree, but also there's an aliveness, almost as if, oh, I am doing I'm sinning against my conditioning type
That's
thing.
right.
And I
Yeah.
wonder how you resolve this for yourself, because, and especially with the, with the child inside who agreed with your mom, I'm not going to be like that. And here you are, in order to resolve your repression, you have to give yourself permission to be like him. And again, let me just offer a distinction here to everybody
Yeah.
listening. That doesn't mean that you're gonna become the raging alcoholic and the rageaholic, man now. But it's like, oh, if I don't give myself permission to let that which is already inside of me emerge and burst, therefore, odds are I'm gonna find a new version of dysfunction, to, I don't know, to try to push it down. So yeah, how did you reconcile both? Because to us, one can say you just broke an agreement that you had with your mom in order to resolve the repression.
Yep. Man, that's such a good question. I love this question, actually. And it's like, yeah, because to get angry, I mean, that's what I should have been able to do when I was 5 years old. But now I'm 40 and I'm doing the thing that I
Yeah.
should have been able to do when I was 5, which is allow myself to get angry or do the work to come out of the repression so that the body will let me get angry, right? Because if I don't, like you said, I mean, I know you're a young guy, Carl Jung, and it's like he says the thing about if you bury it, it'll come forth later in horrendous ways. If you bury whatever it is, and that's so true because it comes forth in depression, anxiety, chronic pain, addiction, whatever it is. It just starts showing, manifesting as some suffering state. But if I don't do that, then it just stays in there. Because when I say it's okay to be my dad, or it's okay to be like dad, like when I say that, what I'm acknowledging is that I'm already like him, but it's
Yeah.
just happening below the level of consciousness. Like I already am like that because there's rage and anger buried, in my unconscious body. And so, I mean, you see it, this is probably controversial to say, but you see it. And like right now in the US, it's like with the politics, it's like you have a lot of anger repressors are folks that are more liberal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we've got the guy in power right now who's more conservative and he's sort of more dominant and he's probably a hurt and vulnerability repressor himself.
Mm.
And there's so much, just like what, you know, there's just so much projection. There's just so
Yeah.
much like, oh, this is like, I've datified our president. You know what I mean? I've like, emotional repression issues are authority issues, especially for
Yeah.
anger repressors, right? So there's
Yeah.
this authority that's this way. And it's like, and what I say to them sometimes when they come into the work is it's like, look, you have a Trump inside of you. If you're an
Mm.
anger repressor, you have a buried Trump that we have to unearth and we have to make conscious. And then once you do that, you're not going to be as upset. I mean, maybe you won't like him, so whatever, but it's not going to be like this battle between you and this, perceived authority or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And then the flip side, of course, for the hurt repressors, where it's like, there's conservative folks who are, all the names that they call people that are, liberals, which is the
Yeah.
snowflake or the, whatever it is, the libtard, there's so many different things. And it's like, well, that's the shadow, right? That's them because they're afraid of their vulnerability and they're afraid of their empathy and they're afraid of their compassion. They're terrified to go there.
Mm.
And that's buried in them. You know what I mean? And so it's the same thing. And, and Al-Anon, they used to say, you spot it, you got it.
Yeah.
And shadow work, same deal, So
Yeah.
anyways, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like we have this, I mean, we are just powerful mirrors for each other, and your ability to see it in somebody means, I mean, it. It's somewhere within you as well.
Totally.
Yeah. So what I would love to get into now is how the repression is there. Somebody has the awareness of the repression. How do I work with it? Let's say it is, I affirm to myself, it is safe for me to be angry and my body tenses up. How do I work with that? or what are the tools that you feel safe to share in the Kiloby inquiries that would help somebody lean in there some more?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I can talk about sort of like the entry level tools, the stuff that you can start to work with, because some of it it needs to happen in the space of, doing as just you go deeper with the work. So you need,
Yeah.
sort of some mentoring in it. But
Yeah.
to start with, to test it, we have a thing called somatic testing, right? Where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, um, if you want to find out just what you said, if you want to find out sort of what your dominant repression might be, and maybe you already know, maybe you're listening to this going, I'm definitely an anger repressor because of what they're talking about. This is how I show up in the world, or maybe hurt and vulnerability. But one of the things is, I mean, you could use exactly what you said, Xavier. You could just say it's safe. It's safe to tap into my anger,
Yeah.
or it's safe to even know that I'm angry, or it's okay to be angry. Right? It's any question, we call it a reverse inquiry. Any question that would provoke the body to disagree, and what we're looking for is disagreement or objection in the body, right? And so sometimes it can sound like affirmations,
Yeah.
like if you know that you believe I'm not good enough at a deep level, if you know that that's a deficiency story you carry, you can say, I am good enough, which sounds like an affirmation, but it's really to get the body to go, no, you're not. Because
Yeah.
the body believes, no, I'm not, And again, right where it disagrees, that's the doorway into the repression, into working with the buried dominant and the repression of it, So I would say, okay, it's okay to be angry. And maybe my stomach contracts
Yeah.
because I know I'm an anger repressor. It's okay to be angry. Stomach goes, nope. And then to mirror that, it's connecting the mind with the body, right? It's the mind body connection where it's like my
Yeah.
body's down there in that contraction saying, it's not okay to be angry. So I want to start to gently kind of mirror that thought into that contraction over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not okay, or I'm sorry, it's okay to be angry. Body says, nope. And then I'd go, it's not okay to be angry. It's not okay. 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 And as I do that, I'm making the unconscious conscious,
Mm-hmm.
basically, and the contraction starts to, open up. So, um, yeah, that's sort of like the beginning of the process. But
Yeah. And there is this fear that people have of the repression itself. And I would say the bias that most people have is trying to get rid of the tension, the repression, and we might even use all mindfulness tools to try to breathe it away, to try to and I've done that. God knows I've done that so many times. It's like you use your spiritual tools, breath work, to, instead of getting into the repression, to tap out of the repression. And I often talk about the the shadow of nervous system regulation, which is actually a misunderstanding of nervous system regulation, which is I will attempt to just sedate the tension instead of leaning into it and attempting to resolve it. So first, I want to know if this is something that you've noticed a lot with the people that you work with, and how can people shift their relationship to the repression itself instead of looking at it as, okay, this is something wrong that I just want to, the allopathic type of medicine. It's, let me just do a surgery and puncture this thing and amputate the repression and take it away from my body. And it just seems like the psyche doesn't work that way.
yeah, yeah. Oh man, that's a rich topic. So yeah, if you're people coming from spirituality or coming from a nervous system regulation background, so therapy, spirituality, that paradigm, totally. And I did it too for a year. I mean, I did it where it was like I would do inquiry and question my beliefs to calm myself down, or to, you know, find a place of peace or whatever it was, which is really, frankly, for an anger oppressor, kind of dangerous territory because that's what my repression is already doing. My repression is a nervous system regulation mechanism,
Yeah.
It's like, don't be angry, be at peace, be calm, push the anger down,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think you can get, the shadow of nervous system regulation is a good way to put it. Yeah, because in, instead of doing that, for me, it's like the way for me to really get to a place of peace or safety is to go into the anger, to dig up what's buried that's driving the dysregulation in the nervous system. I mean, that's why our nervous systems are dysregulated in the first place, because there's
Yeah.
buried repressed emotions from childhood down there. And so that's where we want to go in KI, instead of going, and in the meantime, if you want to do nervous system regulation techniques, great, do them, but just know that you're probably reinforcing repression. If
Yeah.
you're not looking at the emotional repression, or if you're not looking into that shadow, you're probably just using that technique in the same way that you would use smoking pot or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I just love that so much. I wanted to ask you what, in their relationship with working out of repression, there's just this fear that I'm going to lean into this emotion and I'm going to lose myself. I'm going to lose my mind. It's going to consume me. It's going to overwhelm me. Um, it's going to take over me. I mean, we have some of the fears that I had when I was working with deep sadness, especially because anger came easy to me. It was so easy to get into anger, sadness, and grief. That was a different ball game. And I just felt like I was being swallowed by water, that I was going to drown. Like my
Yeah.
body literally felt like, I'm going to drown myself in there. There's no way I will emerge from it. And the first catharsis that I let myself consciously go into, it was the most frightening and liberating experience ever. At the same time. So what would you say to people who are terrified of, you know, leaning into the fear that they project on the repression? Because there's a projection there. There's like, and the projection may have sounded like, oh, if I allow myself to lean into the anger, I'm just gonna become like a nut job. Like I'm gonna lose my mind on people. I'm gonna become a loose cannon and shoot on everybody, just like my dad did. But yeah, how? So I want to have your thoughts on what it looks like to challenge that fear, because that projection can be so
Yeah.
crippling.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So it's a really specific, we work with it in a specific way, right? So if there's a ton of fear around even starting the process or going towards your dominant, basically,
Yeah,
right? The thing to start to recognize first is that your system's producing that fear because it's safer than it is. Weirdly, the fear is safer than it is to tap into the buried dominant, right? So
yeah,
if I was doing that, if I was looking at that in the work, I would say something like, I don't have to be afraid to do this inquiry, or I don't have to be afraid for you to tap into the grief or to the sadness, or for me, I don't have to be afraid to tap into the anger. And the body would go, yes, I do.
yeah,
It would react and go, I do, I have to, I have to, I have to. And then we want to make that in the same way, mirror that and going, I have to be afraid. I have to be afraid. I have to be afraid. And it's what we call rapid fire, but we will just repeat what the body's already saying, which is, I have to be afraid. I have to be afraid. I have to be afraid for a period of time. And then that starts to transmute that. And then maybe I'll have more access, and it'll feel safer to go towards the buried dominant. So, yeah.
I'm really interested in this mechanism, which is reflecting to the body what the body is saying,
Yep.
and how that, you know, um, opens the door to a certain degree. Why do you think that works? Of like, first you say, I don't have to be afraid of leaning into what I've repressed, and the body says, you're crazy, my friend. I'm I'm scared shitless.
Yeah.
And then you're literally reinforcing what the body is saying, and it may sound counterintuitive, or to me, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but why do you think it works?
I think it works because it's the whole principle is it's the thing that is unseen or unconscious that it's in control of me when I'm unaware of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there's something already running in my body saying I have to be afraid of anger, and it's saying that 24 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm anxious. That's what my anxiety is.
Mm.
Is there's this thing running down here, maybe it's in my stomach or solar plexus going, I have to be afraid to be angry. I have to be afraid to be angry. I have to be afraid to be angry. I have to be afraid. And so as long as that's unconscious, I'm just going to suffer. Right. So to tap into it, like we're talking about, to go, I don't have to be afraid. And it goes, yes, I do. And then to send it right back, to send the same program right back into where it's running in the body.
Mm-hmm.
That's when things start to transmute, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's where it's like, and sometimes it's really intense, like just going, I have to be afraid. 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 But I'm making the unconscious conscious. I'm doing it in a really direct way.
Yeah.
In that moment, So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it sounds counterintuitive. And I sometimes tell people, like, we talk about self-love a lot, which is beautiful. I mean, great concept and stuff. But it's like some people, because their bodies, you're already hating yourself in your body,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're already repressing stuff, or you're hating yourself. You've been programmed to hate yourself or to reject yourself. And so to make that conscious first is the act of self-love, which is the weirdest thing. So to say, like, I don't have to hate myself. And the body goes, yes, I do. And then go, I have to hate myself. I have to hate myself. I have to hate myself. Then that program starts to transmute and dissolve. And then there's the self-love.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it sounds so weird and backward, but
Yeah. Would you say that in the moment, what is going on is the body is operating from a perception that hasn't been really acknowledged yet. And when you are able to basically say, when you say, I have to be afraid, you're basically telling to the body, oh, I see you. I've received it's like the command center was not aware of what was going on in there. And now maybe that intelligence in the body is like, oh, now you're hearing me, therefore I no longer need to clench. Would you say that there is a little bit of that at work there, where the body feels like, oh, now I'm being acknowledged, and because I'm being acknowledged, I leave that up to you now. I no longer need to clench. Would you say maybe some of that could be at work here?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And I think it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could say it better than that. That was great.
Mm,
and like for me, one of the first inquiries I did around this was around this sort of like what's happening in my body that's driving my suffering. Was I said this as a reverse inquiry? I said, I don't have to suffer anymore, because I noticed my suffering would keep coming back even though I was processing emotions. The suffering mechanism felt almost addictive, like I have to keep suffering. So I went, I don't have to suffer anymore. And the body went, yes, I do. I have to. And it Xavier gave me a list of like 15 different beliefs, the reasons why I had to continue to suffer that were left over from childhood, And so I would just one by one went through and goes, I have to suffer to be safe. 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 Or I have to suffer to get love. I have to suffer to get love. Or I have to suffer to protect myself, or whatever it was,
yeah.
Yeah. And then it's like, once we become consciously aware of it, then it loses its power.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the next step you would say is really diving into what the body was holding beneath.
What was it holding beneath? Because it's safer to suffer in those thoughts or in those programs than it is to dive into the buried dominant and the fear of the expression of that dominant. So
yeah, that's
yeah.
really interesting. I really love it. And how much of our suffering would you say is because the body is holding onto tension and is not being acknowledged by your conscious mind?
It's hard to put numbers on it, but in my experience, it's most of it, honestly.
Yeah.
If there's something, if there's some holdout, like if there's some area where it feels like I can't resolve that suffering in the body, or I can't get to it, it means there's still something in there that's unseen, unconscious, that's being believed, that really all I have to do is identify what that is, challenge it, and then tie it to the buried stuff.
Yeah.
And then, and sometimes, this is why when we do mentorship with people, it's like, to have somebody going, try this,
Yeah.
because it gets really, really nuanced and really clever the deeper you go into the body. The ego or the
Yeah.
repression programming gets super clever about stuff, like, I don't know, there's so many different examples, but sometimes I was doing a short this morning, I was talking about the repression mechanism itself, and some people call that the ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is fine, but it reminds me of like sort of like a evil magician or something who's like, there's like a smoke bomb is like, and there's like
Yeah.
sleight of hand and like trying to like look over there or misdirection or whatever it is,
Yeah.
But it's like the more skillful you get at it, the more you can catch what's the thing that my system's landed on that I'm believing.
Yeah.
Challenge it, tie it to the buried stuff, and that's the sort of the one tool,
Yeah. I mean, I love this so much, and I want to get into the angle of addiction, because addiction often emerges as a pain management mechanism. That's how I kind of relate to addiction, or to the addict archetype inside of us. And to somebody, for somebody dealing with emotional repression that is showing up in any form of addiction, and it could be, addiction to distraction, to scrolling, addiction to I don't know, to a substance, or addiction to sex or porn or whatever it is, whatever flavor of addiction it is. How can they begin to work with it instead of against it, to pop the lid off the repression? And maybe what did it look like for you, for example?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that I started to recognize in my experience, with the help of Scott, some other people, was that the repression drives compulsion,
Yes.
right? So it's basically like the mechanism of emotional repression is addiction. And I'll say it this way, because when I'm burying my anger unconsciously and compulsively, when the anger is continuing to be buried, then I'm constantly in a state of suffering, whether it's, intense or mild or whatever, I'm suffering, right? And so then if I'm constantly in a state of suffering, I've just got to find something to soothe myself or to, help me cope. And that's what,
Yeah.
addiction is. Um, So yeah, for me, it was realizing, okay, I'm holding this thing down, and that's what's causing this buried anger. I'm holding that down. That's what's causing the dysregulation. And then in order to regulate myself, since I have no other way, I have to reach for, a drug, or for me, it was pornography. So this is really different than how they approach recovery, like in the traditional sense, like 12-step, or just, most programs you're going to go to are going to say, you got to stop that thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to stop doing that.
Yeah.
In KI, we say, okay, stopping might reinforce your repression. You know what I mean? Because stopping is what you're already doing with your buried dominant. Don't do that. Put it
Yeah.
down, right? And so in KI, we say, it's like, look, test both sides of your addiction. When I say both sides, I mean this, like the compulsion side. That's the first side. Test the compulsion and say this to yourself as a reverse inquiry. Say, I don't have to use fill in the blank. I don't have to use alcohol,
Yeah.
food, porn, whatever it is. I don't have to do that. Body might say, yes, I do, right? Because if you have an addiction to it, your body's going to go, yes, I do. I have to, I have to. And so that's the first part. And then we'll tie that side, the I have to, or the compulsion, we'll tie that to the buried emotions. Also, and this is the part that's counterintuitive for people if you've been through the traditional recovery, system, try this. It's okay if I do. It's okay if I drink or if I eat or if I use porn. And if you've got any of that programming, same thing, make that conscious, right? Like, it's not okay. It's not okay. I have to stop. I have to stop. I have to stop. And then we tie that to the buried stuff, So both the movement to do it and the movement to not do it are covers for the emotional repression.
Yeah. Would you say that de-shaming, the addictive pattern or activity, whatever it is an important part of recovering from addiction?
Huge. Totally. And for me, I had to have a person like Scott, who was sort of my mentor, who was the only person that wouldn't shame me for that, for my stuff, because around the sex and porn stuff, there's a lot of shame with that, So I had to have that. But that was when we didn't have the repression work developed yet. And so now when I'm working with people, I'll say, look, sure, other people might be shaming you for it. The world might be shaming you for whatever you're doing, because we tend to do that as humans. We, see the addict and go, oh, they're choosing and they should do better, get a job, whatever.
Yeah.
Which is such a misunderstanding. But in the repression, there's a self-shaming mechanism. That's what's happening, is that you're constantly shaming yourself. And that's actually, it's synonymous with the emotional repression mechanism. So if I'm saying I have to shame myself, if my system is going, I have to shame myself for what I'm doing, it's the same movement as I have to bury and repress my dominant. I have to bury and repress my anger, right?
Yeah.
So, and so in that way, it's like once the self-shaming mechanism starts to fall away, because for me, it was my anger started to come more online. And then lo and behold, I'm not shaming myself anymore. What's going on here?
Yeah. Would you say in such a way, the self-shaming for the addictive pattern is fueling the addictive pattern?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think it can become an aphrodisiac, a part of the pleasure of the addiction.
Yeah.
Is the self-shaming for some people.
It's like some sort of pleasure for breaking the rule type thing. Yeah. That's really interesting. And even thriving off of it's happening in your inner world, so no one is going to be there to catch you when you do that. But it's this kind of loop of maybe shame, breaking the rule, quote unquote, of like not defaulting to the addiction, and that feeling guilt afterwards. And after, of course, as you break the rule, there's a certain degree of pleasure or relief that comes out of it, and then feeling guilt again, and then you shame yourself, and then to break yourself off, it's really
the cycle.
One could say a vicious cycle. But
So let me actually say one more thing about that, because that's such a rich topic too. Is when I worked at the Kiloby Center for a while, which was Scott's treatment center. It's closed now, but we would work with people that were coming off of whatever drug it was, right? And I used to say to them, until, for you, like if it was a woman that had been drinking alcoholically, I said, until drinking alcohol in your system can be the same as eating broccoli, it means you've still got programming and emotional repression stuff to work with,
there's still a charge.
If there's anything there in your system that's going, either I have to do that or it's not okay, or there's still, when you do it and you get into that cycle that you just talked about guilting yourself and then doing it again and all that stuff, until you can have a sip of alcohol and you're like, it doesn't mean anything. Basically, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean you messed up. Doesn't mean you made a mistake. Then you still got work to do. So,
What do you think are some beliefs, or I like to think of them as some spiritual fallacies that sometimes keep us from meeting the truth and the rawness of our emotional repression? Because there are so many, I want to say, distortions. Let's take the example of anger, the example of anger. Some people from the Buddhist way of, from the Buddhist traditions have a very difficult relationship with anger because they perceive it as ill will. And, anger just gets conflated with so many different other things. And I just wonder, what are some of these thought forms that we might need to let go of to reconcile with our emotional body?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that too with folks that are more Eastern philosophies, and like the loving kindness or the equanimity or whatever it is. It's like those concepts are so important. And frankly, those concepts are beautiful and important.
Yeah.
Like I still hold. The problem is, yeah, when, like you said, when they get conflated with the repression. And you did a post recently that I thought was brilliant. We were talking about that emotional repression or repression co-ops virtues. You know what I mean? Like it takes a,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's this beautiful virtue. But then if I'm a Buddhist and I'm an anger repressor, if I'm using the belief that I have to be loving and kind to all beings as a way to repress my anger and to hurt myself, I mean, I may not know that I'm doing that, but if I'm doing that, then that's not very loving or kind, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's
You
like
know?
a kindness that must not exclude you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So there are a few questions that I love to ask to every guest who comes to the show. And the first one is, the name of the podcast is Enheartened. And the premise behind it is, I consider enlightenment being this journey of reaching higher, reaching for the brightest light we can tap into, and endarkenment being the journey of reaching beneath and trying to love the aspects of ourselves that we didn't know how to love, the ones that we repressed in the dark, we shut down in the body. And I really feel like our path is to embrace both. It's really at the intersection. And for me, the heart is the intersection. This is why I talk about enheartenment, bringing more of these aspects of ourselves, more of who we are into the heart. And when I thought about doing this um, interview with you, I thought the journey of undoing emotional repression is key, it's central. So the question is, I assume that we are all constantly working on loving some aspects of ourselves. And I wonder at this time, because people can look at you and be like, okay, this guy has done so much work on himself and all of that. And, there's a pedestaling that often happens in spiritual circles in like this line of work. And I wonder, what are aspects of yourself that you're still learning how to love?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, that pedestalizing too, I'll just say that the pedestalizing, which I've done so much of, whether it's putting up on the pedestal or looking down from the pedestal or whatever it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
that has been a direct result of the emotional repression for me. Whether whether something's forcing me up or forcing me down, that's because of the stuff I'm trying to avoid in the body.
Yeah.
So that side of it, oh my gosh, so much experience. And that's what we say to people sometimes, is like, if you have authority issues, whether it's being an authority or having an authority over you, that's the gold, because that'll take you right to what you've repressed. And then
Yeah.
as you come out of repression, it sort of levels the whole playing field. Talk about equanimity. It's like that, you know.
Yeah.
But this morning, I mean, this is the first video podcast I've ever done. So this morning I was out taking my walks. I usually film videos and stuff on my walks. I did one actually on confusion and self-doubt, because since this is my first time being on screen and talking about this, and especially to you, who I really admire, and I was like, I was starting to doubt, the little bit of self-doubt and confusion was coming in, like, oh, should I talk about this? Or, oh, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about in that area, whatever it was. And so
Yeah.
that's the stuff that I'm currently working with. And I just was out there going, I don't need to doubt myself. I don't have to doubt myself. I don't have to be in this confusion in the body. Yeah, you kind of do, that's like that.
Yeah.
That's like the old habit. And so I just took that right in and then tied it to the buried stuff. And then, starts to let go. So yeah, there's that. And then I think for me to really connecting and with my heart, you know what I mean? I've
Yeah.
had a tendency in relationships to, like I said, to disconnect and to avoid true connection, you know?
Hmm.
And I'm still working with threads of that too, because there's some outstanding people still that I have fear around saying this to them or, you know, showing them who I am, you know? So yeah, that's the stuff I'm working with. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for sharing your process about just, even coming onto the show and how you work through that and even putting yourself out in this way, which I am really grateful for. I really appreciate it. And the last question I would love to ask you is, this year I'm releasing a book that's called Scars of Gold.
Yeah.
And basically the journey is, we all have these sacred wounds that through working on healing them, and there's some magic that unfolds on the other side. And I call the magic a scar of gold. So I wonder, what is a wound of yours that became, as you started working on healing it, it became a scar of gold? That's the first side. And also, what would you say to somebody who is currently struggling with that same wound at the moment?
I think because it's top of mind, because of what I was talking about this morning, that self-doubt pattern, that's very strong for me. So I think self-doubt for sure has been, and the inability to trust myself for my experience is my scar. And the one that's produced. So, I mean, some of the first really powerful inquiries that I did around that was I can totally trust myself. You
Yeah,
know, I don't have to doubt myself. And the system just was like, oh no, like
yeah,
you have to live in self doubt, Dan. That's who you are,
yeah,
So that, and then to somebody that's dealing with it right now, what I'd say is the self doubt is weirdly in a maladaptive way trying to help you and keep you safe.
hmm,
The self doubt is the mechanism that's trying to keep you away from what's buried in the body, So instead of letting it continue to take you away from that, in our work, what we do is use the self doubt to go towards it, so that you can get into it.
yeah,
Um, yeah. And that as you do that, the self trust really does start to return, and the expression will come more online. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's almost like, yeah, I get to doubt myself and I
Yeah.
also get to keep going. Almost. So I just want to name what I've received from this conversation in the way you're approaching the inquiries, which is resolving repression is not the repression of the repressor. And what I'm trying to get at is basically, let's say self-doubt is here. Usually people would want to work out of self-doubt by erasing self-doubt. It's like, oh, I'm confident if I no longer have any form of self-doubt. I am confident if that voice never ever emerges. But what I'm hearing you say is, oh, the doubt can be here. And I sometimes also get to doubt myself. And maybe my body just needs to know that I am aware that to a certain point, it is healthy to have a certain degree of self doubt, to not be so overly cocky.
Yeah.
That, I don't know, I put myself on a pedestal or whatever. And maybe that's the reassurance that my body needs to hear for it to release now any form of fear or whatever else wounding that might be underneath. And then now I can maybe be even more confident in my expression. So I don't know if I summarized it well, but
Yeah.
yeah, would you like to add more to this?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. What I would say is, like when it came up for me this morning, I was watching it happen. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what feels like as I come out of repression more is whatever the old mechanism is that's running, whether it's self doubt, self hatred, um, other hatred, I mean, there's so many different variations of it. Whatever that is, the more I come out of repression, the more I'm just kind of watching it happen, and the less true it feels in the body, literally.
Yeah.
Whether and it can be a deficiency story. Like I'm unwanted was a huge one for me for a long time, and now when I say that to myself, there's nothing on it.
Yeah.
But it was a progressive thing where it was like I was totally believing it before I'd done the work, and then as I did the work, I believed a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. And then by now it's sort of just like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, yeah. I love that so much. So I hope this conversation will support anybody who is dealing with any form of repression. And I wanted to ask you, Dan, first, thank you again for showing up as you did. Really appreciated that. Really love it. How can people get into your world?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram, on TikTok. I have a Facebook account. There's just a personal account. And in about a week, I'll have the website you can find me at is Get With Deprogram, right? So get with DEPROGRAM.com.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and you can, if you want, do a couple sessions, put your foot in the water. We can test that out. I also do mentorship, which is more long and involved, which is really what the heart of the work is. But yeah, that's how you can find me. And yeah, I really appreciate being here, man. And with you and connecting and, meeting you for the first time. And yeah, feel
I
honored.
love it. It has been a pleasure. Are there any last words of wisdom that you'd love to offer to anybody who's listened up until now?
I mean, I'd say your back's never against the wall. That's what I like to say to people a lot. If you're dealing with something and you feel like the suffering is insurmountable or that it's, you're in an impossible situation, that's not true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dan.
yep. Thank you.